Good afternoon. I'd like to call this special school board meeting of September 13, 2016 to order. The time is 5:11 p.m. The purpose of today's meeting is to hold a public hearing to consider the adoption of the 2016-2017 final millage rate and the 2016-2017 final budget. At this time, we request that all cellular phones be turned off or put into the silent mode. I'd like to take this opportunity to remind the members of the public the district's mission, which is to ensure that each student achieves his or her highest personal potential, and the district's vision to be a world-class school system. Today's agenda includes presentations of the percent of increase over the rollback rate, the proposed millages, the budget overview, the proposed final budget, the public hearing on the final budget, the adoption of the required local effort millage, the basic discretionary millage, the capital outlay millage, the resolution determining revenues and millages, the FY17 final budget and related resolutions adopting the final budget, and the comments from the board members and the superintendent and the board attorney. Board members, is there a motion to adopt the agenda as read?
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Fisher, seconded by Ms. Dozier. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Are you here? Motion carries 4-0. I'll now turn over the meeting to Dr. Atkins and Dr. Desimore for our Chief Financial Officer for the presentation of the budget.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Teuber. It is my pleasure to present this budget to you and the board. And at this time, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Desimore and Kelly Letcher to take us through the PowerPoint presentation, and then I'll reserve my comments for the end of the presentation. So, Dr. Desimore.
Good afternoon, Dr. Atkins and members of the board. This hearing is the second of two public hearings required under Florida statutes to provide the public an opportunity to give input into the proposed millage levy and the budget for this fiscal year. The superintendent submitted his proposed tentative budget to you on July 20th, and the tentative hearing was advertised in the news press on Friday, July 22nd. The first public hearing was held on July 26 to discuss and adopt the tentative millage rates and the tentative budget. On Tuesday, September 6th, you all received information on the final budget for this year, and the second and final public hearing being held today was noticed through a direct mailing from the property appraiser's office, and that document is known as the TRIM, or Truth in Millage Notice, and was sent from the property appraiser's office as required by law. So we have several pieces of information to go over with you today, and Kelly and I will be sharing the responsibility of doing that today.
As outlined by TRIM requirements, we must first discuss the millage rollback rate. Basically, the rollback rate is the millage in which, when applied to the current year's tax roll, net adjustments for the new growth would produce the same dollars as received in the previous year. The calculated rollback rate is 6.7628 mils. We are actually levying 6.989 mils. That's an increase of 3.34% over the rollback rate. The proposed millage rate for the 2016-17 school year is 6.989 mils. It's a decrease of 0.296 mils from the 2015-16 millage rate of 7.285 mils.
And just to point out, when you look at that total millage of the 6.989 that we're talking about today, required local effort millage, there's three parts to that millage as you see listed here: the required local effort, discretionary millage, and capital millage. So of the total, required local effort millage is required by the state in order to participate in any other state funding that is received, and it represents about 68% of the total millage that we're proposing to levy today.
The new millage rate will generate about $25.3 million more than the previous year because of the increase in the tax roll. As you can see on the comparisons, when the tax roll goes up, the millage rate goes down. And you can see that in this comparison, as well as the tax roll history as it's going up, the mills will go down. When you look at the millage rate on the individual tax homeowner, it is dependent on their property and the exemptions that they receive and things. But if you look, the tax roll went up about 9.7% this year. If you look at the average homeowner of a house of last year, the value at $100,000, that value now would be at about $109,700. The last year's millage rate or tax rate on that would have been $728.50. This year, that would be $766.69. So that would be an increase of $38.19 to the individual homeowner. If you look at a homeowner that has the Save Our Homes on their property, it doesn't allow the value to increase more than 3% a year. It looks a little bit different. The value of a home last year at $100,000 would have been $103,000 this year, with a tax rate of $546.38 last year and $545 this year, which would have been a decrease of $1.24 to the individual homeowner. And there's some other examples of individual properties and how much that would be. This year, for the required local effort, which is the required piece by statute that you do, it's 4.741, and that is going to generate about $345,104,000. The basic operating discretionary of .748 mils is $54,447,963. Capital outlay of 1.5 mils will generate $109,187,092. Sorry about that. For a total millage of 6.989 to generate $508,739,055. Tonight, the recommended final budget is a total of about 1.5 billion. So it's made up of the general fund of $857,287,785. The debt service is $53,020,812. The capital budget is $286,295,128. Special revenue grants is $54,512,090. Special revenue food service is $68,533,167. Internal service is $136,399,999 for a total of $1,456,048,981.
So, as you all are aware, we have 6 different funds within the budget, each of them earmarked for specific purposes. General, which is the general fund, which is for the general education and operating expenses of the district, and it is our biggest fund within the budget. We've got the debt service fund, which is specifically for the payment of debt, principal and interest payments of the district. You have the capital fund, which is used to build schools, buy equipment, and provide maintenance across the district. We have our food service fund, which supports the breakfast and the lunch program for all students in our county. Special revenue, which is our federal funds that are given to us, of course, by the federal government and must be used for the specific purpose in which they are given. And the internal service fund, which accounts for all of the insurance costs of the district, both health insurance and property and casualty. So we just want to highlight just a few portions of the budget today in each of these different funds to give what we think is a comprehensive picture of what the total budget is. So, as I mentioned before, the general fund is our major source of revenue for the district's operations, our daily operations. That budget for the general fund in this final budget is $857.3 million, and it represents about 59% of our total budget. We are estimated to have over 92,000 students this year, so as big as the district has ever been. And so when we look at the funding that we got from the state and how it's supposed to support those 92,000 students, we received of the funding in the general fund about $676 million in total from FEFP revenue, which is about a $21 million increase from the previous year. It was less than a 1% increase in per pupil funding. So we've talked about that increase before in many of our previous briefings related to the budget for this year. It is what we have, and we believe, based on the budget that we have, that that the district as a whole worked together and did some pretty fantastic things this year that we think will turn great benefits for students. As Kelly mentioned earlier, there's a 9.68% increase in the tax roll. So we'll talk about the effect of that in just a little bit and how that affects both operating and capital. And so within the FEFP, of that $667 million that we received in that, 41% of that comes from state funding sources, and then the remainder, the 59%, comes from the property taxes in which we're talking about levying this evening. The sources of our operating revenues, this is strictly within our general fund. As I mentioned, 59% of that comes from local sources, almost 41% from state, and just a very small sliver comes from federal sources within our operating fund. So when we talk about where that money goes, how that money is budgeted within the operating fund, you have, for our final budget, 72% of those funds budgeted towards instruction or direct school expenses. So that is all of the instructional support and school administration. So all those things that happen at our schools, and then with the remaining percentages falling as you see within this graph. Now, we've taken that based on a little conversation that we had at our last briefing, and we've broken that out in a different way for you here as well. So in this pie, you will see your basic instruction and then instructional support broken out. So basic instruction are the teachers that are within the classrooms every day, all of your basic paras, and then instructional support are those things around that within a school building, like your guidance counselors, media specialists, and things like that. So that is where, with this previous graph, you had 72% as instruction and direct school expenses. That 72% is then broken out between basic instruction and your instructional support. So just a little bit more information related to that. We have our food service fund, and that is currently budgeted at $68.5 million. It does include still breakfast for every child at no additional cost to parents, and we've done that for several years now. The lunch prices remain the same for 2017, and the community eligibility program that we started last year remains in effect, and we added one school to that mix. So I believe currently we have only 7 schools that are not under the community eligibility program for this current fiscal year. Special revenue, as I mentioned before, is at $54.5 million. That encompasses our Title I funds, IDEA, and other federal grants such as TIF that we have, and those other federal sources or other federal funding that we get from our U.S. government. Our capital funds are currently at $286.3 million. In our capital funds, local property tax is the sole source of revenue, or the sole substantial source of revenue that we have inside of our capital funds now. Within the capital plan that you have inside of the documentation that you received, that does include the debt or the COPS revenue for the two new high schools, one in the South Zone and one in the East Zone, in the 5-year plan. Another major focus within the 5-year plan is maintenance and renovations of our existing buildings. And one of the things that we have in there as well is replacement of a lot of our aging school bus fleet. And you all had the benefit of seeing some of that with one of the new buses that we have parked out front that Mr. Law was very proud of today.
The debt service payments total about $43.5 million per year. That does not include the LLL. As soon as the debt for LL is, the COPS are sold, we'll add that to the debt as well. The statutory debt service capacity, we're at 50.6% of the statutory debt capacity, and we're at 75.9% of the recommended debt service capacity. So the statutory debt capacity is 75% of our millages that we levy on the 2 mil, and the recommended debt service is 50%, which is what you all recommended, that we stay at 50% of our 1.5 mils for capital. We have reserves that are set aside, and that's to protect the district's financial position. Currently, between the board priorities and contingency, we have a 5.5% set aside for that. The required amount is 3%. Anything under 3%, the state comes in and looks at your, they start monitoring you, but we're at 5.5%, so we're above the recommended amount.
Now, the budget that we're talking about here also contains the intent to implement growth increment funding. Now, the purpose of this growth increment funding is to identify general fund funding and utilize that funding to help with capital needs. We talked about this a little bit in July, but this calculation that you're seeing now looks different from the one we discussed in July, and it certainly is simpler. So, to kind of go through the calculation, the district has 3 millages. We've got the required local effort millage. Remember, that's the bulk of the millage that we levy. It's about 68% of the millage, the total millage that we're asking to levy. That required local effort changes each year. As Kelly referenced a little bit earlier in the presentation, as our tax roll floats up, the required local effort millage floats down. So that does not stay the same. So we're not dealing with that millage inside of this calculation. Capital millage is 1.5 mils, and that's already dedicated to capital, so that's outside of this. The discretionary millage stays constant. And the discretionary millage, or at least it does at this point in time, and the discretionary millage, as we mentioned earlier, is 0.748. So for purposes of the growth increment calculation, we're going to use the discretionary millage because that stays the same from year to year. And the increase in funding that is driven from the discretionary millage times the increase in the tax roll will be the growth increment for the year. So if you look at the calculation here, in 2016, or in last year's tax roll, the tax roll was about $69.1 billion. And when we applied our 0.748, or our discretionary millage, to that, it generated revenue of about $49.6 million. In 2017, the tax roll is going up to $75.8 million. So applying that discretionary millage then gives us a revenue of $54.4 million. The difference between those two, $4.8 million, and that is the growth increment funding for the fiscal year. So if you recall, the one with the method that we talked about in July, that generated about $4.3 million. This is generating about 4.8. So it's more funding as far for this year based on this calculation. And then, Mr. Teubner?
But the growth itself is all of those 3 components all have growth increments. Even though they're not predictable, we're getting an additional, I mean, if you take the 9.68% growth in property taxes, that's $46 million more than we saw the previous year. No. Is that right?
Well, I'm not sure that I understood, but if I can refer to maybe how to best answer it would be to refer to page 127 of the budget book, and that is where the FEFP calculation is outlined. So you were the number you just referenced was how much more in additional funding? I'm sorry.
Well, and I'm going to find actually the easiest way. If you go to the graph where you showed the RLEs of, let's see if I can find the page here.
Yeah. A different slide in the presentation, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
If you go to page 22 of the book, or 29 in the presentation, which shows the millage levy, it shows that the millage levy, our discretionary local effort is 4.71. Then it shows, the total is 5.489 with the 1.5 in capital, for a total of 6.989 this year, and it was 7.285 last year. So then that's the difference. But then if you read the next line down, it says the total property assessment for Lee County increased 9.68% from 16 to 17, which is from 69 billion to 75 billion.
Right.
So we're getting $75 billion is the
tax roll.
So the so we're increasing at 75 billion. the 9.6%, we're getting 9.6% increase on all of those components of the millage. In other words, we're getting 9.6, if you use the rollback rate, which we're not, but for example, the .748 discretionary, we're making 9.6% more because the increase in the property values. We're also getting 9.6 more percent of the 1.5 millage. That's also an increase. So our capital we're getting 1.5 mil times.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we are getting more, so 1.5 mil, we're receiving a benefit from the increase of the tax rate with our 1.5 mil. That's already in capital. So whatever benefit we're receiving from an increased tax roll from our capital millage is budgeted within the capital plan, and that's where it's going to stay to benefit whatever we're doing within our capital plan for the 5 years. So that's one piece, right?
I got you.
And then .748 would be the other piece, which is what we're talking about within the growth increment. The last piece of that picture would be the required local effort. And the reason why I say that the general fund doesn't really receive a benefit from that required local effort
Because
really
the FEFP.
is because
Gotcha.
of the FEFP,
Perfect.
right?
Okay.
The way that they drive it.
Got ya.
In that illustration here, you see that that millage going down because this tax roll is going up,
Gotcha.
and that's where your benefit leaves you.
Perfect.
Okay.
I understand.
Okay.
Gotcha. Continue. Thank you.
Yeah.
Did everybody get that?
Okay, so I'm going to come back to this side. Okay. So this 4.8 is the benefit from the 1.5 mils is already captured in capital. So the benefit that we're receiving from the .748, we're also capturing for capital within the growth increment. Okay. So based on the budget here, for Lee County, supporting 122 schools and over 92,000 students, like I said, as big as we've ever been. This budget is supporting the initiatives of the state as well as the district's vision and mission, and it's been really good, I think, to have all of the conversations and kind of following up from the conversation at the briefing regarding Focus Area 4 and some of the very exciting things that have happened in that focus area. Throughout the budget process and culminating at the preliminary budget briefing, when we talked about the types of initiatives that would be included within this budget, we're seeing some of those things come to fruition now with concentrating on aging bus fleet that you're able to see the benefits of that outside, trying to concentrate on recruitment and retention and centering resources towards that, and then also really concentrating on operational efficiency and some of the changes that we can make in order to garner more benefit out of the dollars that we do have, and being able to really discuss that at the table to make make that communication clear between all of us and the public as to some of the things that we're doing to really encompass to really be efficient with what we're doing with our budget and really center on student achievement and the strategic plan and get the biggest bang for our buck out of the budget that we're presenting to you today. So we submit this budget in support of our mission, as we discussed, the students and the employees of Lee County and the citizens of Lee County as well. So the actions that we're asking you all to take tonight, of course, would be to adopt all of the proposed millages for the 2017 final budget, adopt the final budget for the 17 year, and all the resolutions related to that. So we're happy to take any other questions.
Mr. Torber, I mean, one thing just to, I think you pulled it out of her presentation, but just to clarify one point. One of the differences between the way the county calculates the growth increment model and the way that we calculate the growth increment model has to do with the way that the state controls our required local effort. So they decrease that. In our case, the state or the county has control over how they levy that, and so we don't reap the full benefit that they would reap. They capture something in the neighborhood of $9 million, 9.2. We don't capture as much because the state controls our RLE, and therefore we don't get as much benefit as they would. We did ask Dr. Desimores to work with Roger DeJarlais, the county manager, and we did do that. She spoke to him yesterday to make sure that, you know, what we were doing and what they're doing is in alignment. That's an example of a partnership that we're trying to utilize, and I do appreciate the board and their leadership. You've encouraged us. Mrs. Dozier in particular brought him over here to raise that idea with us. We went and visited every county commissioner, and he was involved in some of those meetings where we talked about our growth increment model. We also have talked about other ways that we can share, and I mentioned some of them, like the traffic control system, the GIS system, which will help Mr. Mora in mapping and so forth. So I think we're off to a really good partnership. I'm really encouraged by their willingness to support our efforts. And we even had some of the commissioners that talked to us about supporting our efforts with Grow Your Own and providing some funding to us along those avenues, which will also help our bottom line.
Ms. Dozier?
Well, I want to thank Dr. Desimore, and I want to thank Mr. Atkins Dr. Atkins for being open to this idea. When we met with Mr. DeJarlais, I've met with him numerous times. Their funding mechanism is a little different than ours, and of course, what they're able to recoup each year is much greater than ours. I wish there was a way that we could drill down and figure out how to get more than what we do get. But if you look on page 129 of the booklet, I think that this is the big aha that speaks so overwhelmingly. If you look down to 2007, 2008, you see that students were the state funding formula per student for unweighted dollars. Full-time student got $7,399. Now let's race forward to 2016-17. We've had inflation, we've had growth, we've had everything. Right now, we're still behind the 8 ball. We're still behind. We only get $7,304 in full-time equivalent. So, you know, every single year we have been playing catch-up. And not to mention the fact that we don't get all of the capital dollars. The PICO dollars have been taken away. And for those of you that are unaware of what the PICO dollars are, those are the dollars from the real estate tax. And I think that the public would like to know out there that the public schools no longer get those. These are the types of things that we're going to have to educate the public with, because I think when the public sees that tax on their utility bill and it says education, well, it's no longer going to education. You know, it's not going to public education. Instead, it's going to charter schools, which we know are private schools in a way because they're private business, even though they're called public. They're called public because they're getting public funding, but they are for-profit organizations. So I think that one of the things that, you know, we are I just read something recently that said we're the ambassadors, and one of the things that we have to do is we have to make things simple. And I think that as we go and we make a case for a permanent funding source, and that's something that I've been working on for years, and it just, I can't get any traction with it. I've worked with the state on it, and that's something that we have to do in the state of Florida, because we can no longer have a dip in per student education. And you know, maybe we need to be making our case, Dr. Atkins, at the economic development meeting. We need to make our case because they are trying to grow the state. But if you look at this, and to me, this is the most compelling piece of evidence that education is not first and foremost. And if we're really going to try to grow the state, you're not going to get businesses to come here unless we can truly be competitive with states that pay a much higher per student increment. So that's why I wanted to bring this up to everybody today. And this is the type of language that we have to speak.
Just to comment on that, I did meet with Gary Griffin and Russell Schropp. Get that last name correct. Schropp. And they expressed a real desire to get us back in front of Horizon Council to talk about this particular issue. They wanted to wait until after our executive roundtable, which we have had our executive roundtable. That was a wonderful meeting with a lot of really great ideas in terms of how to make up the gap. So that would be our next step, would be try to take this case to our Economic Development Board and Horizon Council.
Thank you.
Dr. Esmore, can you put up the screen? It's page 27 in the book. It's page 34 in our presentation. It's talking about the general fund appropriations, and I know we have a lot of conversations about not getting enough money.
You're talking about this pie graph?
I'm sorry? No, it's the chart, actually, that says, it's entitled General Fund Appropriations.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're referring to the budget book. Okay.
Yes, or on our presentation, it's page 34 in our presentation, it's page 27 in the budget book.
I can,
Do we have that?
yeah.
Board members, you can turn to that if in your hardcover budget book, it's page 27.
Yes, I can pull that up on the screen if you give me just a second. This one?
Yep, and go
Okay.
up to the chart. There you go.
Yes.
When you look at the transfer reserves, it looks at in 15-16, we actually had $140,000 in transfer reserves, and it got reduced down to $44,000. Can you explain that? What's that rationale for
Yeah.
$96,000?
Yes, that is a good question. Actually, the way that we have the appropriations in the budget is just a little bit different from the beginning to the end of the budget. We categorize reserve in the budget, which is that $44 million number, based on only a few line items. And those line items are what you see on page... on page 64 of your budget book. So they would consist of, so as that $44 million number that you're looking at on page 27, you can see on page 64 of the budget book exactly what encompasses that particular number, which would basically be the contingency, the board reserve, reserve for school vouchers, and then reserve for our FTE shortfall proration. Those are the only things that we categorize as reserve as of the end of the budget. Everything else is more a line item, another line item in the budget that could be, waiting for further appropriation, or caught up in budgets at schools or departments for right now that might carry forward to the next year. So it really is just kind of a naming convention of how we categorize what we call reserve in the budget for the book.
Okay, in doing that shift, did it impact the other categories above it? For example, because salaries and benefits jumped from 2015 to 2016, a 12% increase. Is some of that money, because I see increases, our purchase services is up 8%. We grew 2%, as far as our child growth, but yet our costs, our energy costs are increasing 50%. Our supply costs are increasing 51%. Our capital outlay, I understand we approved that as a board, the increase of the budget for our buses and the rotational scales. But the other ones, the purchase services, the energy, the supplies, the salary and benefits, is there rationale why those are beyond the 3 or 4% that we should be seeing?
Yeah, yes, there could be, yes. how it comes from the bottom or to the top, the reserves to the other ones, it does impact the rest of those lines.
Because
So
we moved it earlier.
because we moved it earlier, right. So for example, if a school we're going to reappropriate items at a school if they did not spend it from the previous year. So if a school has some money in supplies from one year to the next, it's not going to show as an actual expenditure in the one year, but it will show in the budget as an appropriation the next year because we're giving it back to them. So that's just one example of how the numbers may look different or more than what you would expect as a 2 to 3% based on our 2 to 3% growth.
And that's, Dr. Atkins just following up, and that follows into what you were talking about, the more money available to move everything, the process forward. Okay. Thank you. Anybody else? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, at this point, we will now move to Dr. Atkins. Dr. Atkins, if you would,
Okay, I'll start with the first recommendation. Recommend that the Lee County School Board adopt the 2016-2017 final proposed required local effort millage of 4.741 mils with a proposed amount to be raised of $345,104,000. The required local effort includes the basic RLE of 4.729 and a prior period adjustment millage of 0.012.
board members, you heard the superintendent's recommendation on the RLE. Do I have a motion to approve?
No, Mr. Toiber, we need to go to public hearing after Dr.
Oh, I'm sorry, before we do public hearing, would you
reads all
please
five.
read all of your recommendations in order?
Yes,
And then
sir.
we'll go to public hearing, then we'll vote.
Second recommendation, recommend that the Lee County School Board adopt the 2016-2017 final proposed basic discretionary millage of .748 mils with a proposed amount to be raised of $54,447,963. Recommendation 3, recommend that the Lee County School Board adopt the 2016-2017 final proposed capital outlay millage of 1.500 with a proposed amount to be raised of $109,187,092. Total millage to be equal, the total millage will equal 6.989 mils with a total amount to be raised of $508,739,055. The total millage rate to be levied exceeds the rollback rate, is an increase in the rollback rate of 3.34%. Recommendation 4 is recommend the Lee County School Board adopt the resolution determining revenues and millages levied and the resolution adopting the final millage rates for the fiscal year 2016-2017. Recommendation 5, recommend the Lee County School Board adopt the final budget and the related resolution adopting the final budget for the 2016-17 school year as follows. General operating in the amount of $857,287,785. Special revenue budget in the amount of $123,045,257. Debt service budget in the amount of $53,020,812. Capital outlay budget in the amount of $286,295,128. Internal service budget in the amount of $136,399,999 for a total final budget of $1,456,048,981.
Thank you, Dr. Atkins. At this point, we will now recess a special school board meeting and open up the public hearing to consider the adoption of the final millage rates and the final budget for 2016-2017. At this time, the public will be invited to speak on these matters. The time allowed for each speaker will be 3 minutes. Is there anyone in the right section that would like to speak? 1, 2, 3. Anybody else? On the left side. Okay, seeing nobody, we'll call Ms. Quackenbush, you're number 1.
I'd like to reiterate that we need to do some cost-benefit analysis on some of the major structural changes we're doing on our spending, especially with regard to computers. We've seen some damaging stories recently about the use of our computers, and we've also seen some excellent studies on whether or not the use of computers is beneficial to our student population. From psychological, from a physical standpoint, a knowledge standpoint. The West Point study in particular was excellent, showing that we are learning less from paying more on those computers, and that we are learning more from books and manipulatives, using our hands, pens, underlining, being able to review our notes. Those are much more efficient mechanisms for learning. So I think that we should be in our legislative delegation, we need to push for a relaxation in their emphasis on digital learning, which is also detrimental for data mining. So I would like to see if maybe you would pursue a workshop that might review some of the studies that are out there to carefully examine why we're spending so terribly much in our capital budget and in our instructional budget, in training, in technicians required for this transfer, and ongoing expenses, the renewal of the licensing agreements every year, and the ability for textbook publishing companies who are now computer publishing these curriculums to change the curriculum each year, for instance, in history, and rewrite history, much to our chagrin. It doesn't change. We could use older books and use them again and again so that we don't change history. So thank you very much.
Last year, our per student cost annually was just under $15,000 per head. Now it's almost $16,000 per head. That's the simple math. And I know, Mrs. Dozier, I already know the argument you're going to give me. There's two different budgets, operations and whatever the other one is. Doesn't matter. The total budget is what it costs us to teach these kids. And I know Mr. Toiber's going to say, well, we have 2% more students this year. I'm talking about per student cost. Why is it up nearly $1,000 per student when Dr. Adkins is working so hard to trim the budget? I don't understand it until I start to look at all the extra computer stuff we're buying to be Common Core compliant. Whatever name you want to put on Common Core, you can rename it and rebrand it, but it doesn't change the fact that it's Common Core. It's pushed by Common Core, and that's where those extra costs are coming from. So Common Core is costing us a lot. I mean, when you go from 14.8 to 15.8 in 1 year, something's wrong. When we've been working as hard as I know Dr. Adkins has been working to trim the budget elsewhere. Got to explain that one to me, guys.
Thank you once again. Mentioned earlier in the day, it did catch my attention, the Classroom Dojo, which the way I hadn't heard of it until this very moment, but put things together very quickly. The digital revenues, which is back there, which we're hoping in the Finance Advisory Committee would turn into a nice thing. And the key to that is social media. That's what makes Facebook work. It's the social aspect because people want to go to it, and that's how you can sell advertising. This is it. I think this is the key to making that. I've been working in my head, how would that work? If the Classroom Dojo seems to me like if it does attract a lot of attention because you're doing a lot of the same things, even though it's in an educational basis, you could get a lot of traffic generated, and that means you could sell advertising and make some money on it. The second thing, in the beginning of the budget, there's 7 items the board's trying to do, and one of them is outreach. And once again, I think even more important than the sales tax. I think that this board, when it becomes 7 members, or even now, needs to get out there and engage the public with the sole intention of motivating the parents. You can, every other week, Tuesday you have a school board meeting, the other Tuesday, go to one of the schools. throw open the doors and invite the parents and the students to come in. And that's where you'll learn, and that's where you can sell the sales tax. That's where you can sell the health initiative that the superintendent is pushing. This is the way to make the district go, to get the kids to show up, to want to work. That's how you do it. If the board works, not showing up to every once in a while with the superintendent, but out there every 2 weeks, holding meetings across the district, across the county, and getting the public engaged. And those kids will start showing up slowly but surely. It'll improve, and it'll improve rapidly. And then a lot of this stuff will become a lot easier if this board was willing to work. And that's change what the board does. Go from being sitting up here to being out there, making it happen. Okay? That is what will make this budget work, is when this board decides it's going to change, it's going to set in Florida, be the first board to get out there routinely and really engage the public. You will become the #1 district in the state and probably the whole country. Really, think about it. Take the effort to get out there every other week, open the doors, get the parents in there. It will build, momentum will build, and it will show up in the kids' results. Thank you.
I will now close the public hearing and reconvene a special school board meeting of September 13, 2016. The board will now consider each of the superintendent's recommendations. Dr. Atkins, would you please restate your recommendations individually and allow the board to act on them?
Okay, first recommendation is recommended the Lee County School Board adopt the 2016-2017 final proposed required local effort millage of 4.741 mills with a proposed amount to be raised of $345,104,000. The RLE includes a basic RLE of 4.729 and a prior period adjustment millage of 0.012.
Board members, you heard the superintendent's recommendation. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Dozier, seconded by Ms. Morgan. Any discussion? I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Motion carries 5-0. Dr. Atkins.
Second recommendation is recommended the Lee County School Board adopt the 2016-2017 final proposed basic discretionary millage of .748 mills with a proposed amount to be raised of $54,447,963.
Board members, you heard the superintendent's recommendation. Is there a motion to approve?
Moved.
Moved by Ms. Morgan, seconded by Ms. Dozier. Any discussion? I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0. Number 3, Dr. Atkins.
Recommend that the Lee County School Board adopt the 2016-2017 final proposed capital outlay millage of 1.500 with a proposed amount to be raised of $109,187,092. The total millage will equate to 6.989 mills with a total amount to be raised of $508,739,055. The total millage rate to be levied exceeds the rollback rate. It is an increase in the rollback rate of 3.34%.
Board members, you heard the recommendation. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
Moved by Ms. Fisher, seconded by Ms. Dozier. Any discussion? I'd like to make the point that, we used to have 2 mil of capital millage, and if we were to actually have that, that would be another $34 million for this particular year. That would pretty much get us a long way down the road as far as meeting our capital needs. I request and I implore everybody in our community to put pressure on our legislators. We gave up that $500,000. Actually, we gave up a quarter at a time. During the crisis, it was supposed to be a temporary item. We did it the first year. We agreed as boards across the state. We worked collectively with our state legislators. We did that in 2006, 2007. We gave back that $250,000 and acquiesced and worked. We thought was a win-win for everybody to get through us through hard times because there was huge gaps in the state. Well, so the following year, what do? Well, they didn't give it back to us. They said, hey, it worked so good this year, we're going to take another $250,000 again next year. So they took a $500,000 away from us, and that was back in 2007, 2008, and we've never seen it returned. And that has been the reason that we're in the plight that we're in. So, if you really want to help one of the solutions is, get our legislators to go in front of Tallahassee and say, restore the capital millage where it needs to be to fund public education properly in our capital expenditures. So until then, we'll do with what we have, and I'll be supporting this. So I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0. Dr. Atkins.
Recommendation 4, recommend that the Lee County School Board adopt the resolution determining revenues and millages levied and the resolution adopting the final millage rates for the fiscal year 2016-2017.
Board members, you heard the recommendation. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Fisher, seconded by Ms. Morgan. Any discussion? I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0. And your final recommendation, Dr. Atkins.
Recommend the Lee County School Board adopt the final budget and the related resolution adopting the final budget for the 2016-17 school year as follows. General operating in the amount of $857,287,785. Special revenue budget in the amount of $123,045,257. Debt service budget in the amount of $53,020,812. Capital outlay budget in the amount of $286,295,128. Internal service budget in the amount of $136,399,999, for a total final budget of $1,456,048,981.
Board members, you heard the recommendation by the superintendent. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Ms. Dozier, seconded by Ms. Fisher. Any discussion? Ms. Dozier.
Yes, we have had numerous, usually I say I'm gonna keep up with the hours, but we have gone over this budget. We've gone over this budget. In fact, I would ask, Ms. Desamore, can you estimate approximately how many hours you've spent on this budget? You didn't expect that, did you?
Yeah, I thought you meant that we spent at the table. I was prepared to say that. How I spent the I've probably seen this budget more than my husband in the past 6 months. Let's put it that way.
And we've spent at the table approximately how many hours?
Oh wow, at least one briefing a month since November. So probably at least between board briefings and individual, probably 60 to 70 hours at least.
And the question I always ask, I like to say it's an onion and we peel back every layer of the onion. Do you see anything that we could have done differently to present a better budget than what we have now?
I don't see anything we could have done differently. Of course, we're a continuous improvement organization and want to be a model continuous improvement organization. So we're going to continue to look for those ways that we can improve and become more efficient every year and do a better job of highlighting that in our communication amongst ourselves and to the public. So that's going to be what we want to be. One of our major concentrations for this year is really well highlighted budget communication to the public all throughout the year.
Okay. And so what you're saying is that this is the best budget for this time that you're presenting it, that we can actually put on the table?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And you agree with that, Dr. Atkins?
Yes.
Okay. Then I will be supporting it.
Ms. Fisher?
Yes, and I just want to add to that, and that being said, thank you for all of the time and for keeping us informed and giving us the facts. And I know that a lot of the initiatives that we have seen started this year are going to give us a return on investment, and we will in fact be increasing our spending efficiency. So again, thank you for that. And I will be supporting this.
Thank you. Ms. LaRiviere, do you have something to say?
No, I just want to say kudos to our staff for their hard work. Kudos to each board member for their conversations you've had with Dr. Desamore and Dr. Atkins. I believe all of us have done our due diligence, and I am very proud of our staff, and I believe this is the best possible budget we can come up with. So I'm in support.
Ms. LaRiviere. I'll also be supporting this budget. I'd like to just make a couple statements. First off, I commend Dr. Atkins for doing some of the very difficult things that we had to do, and for when he decides to do them, to have Dr. Desamore and her team figure out how to get it done. We increased the capital budget 48%. It's an increase of $93 million, and that is just what we had to do, because for 8 years, we have decimated our capital budget with our busing, with our repairs for our major units. You know, the taxpayers pay a whole lot of money for all the facilities that we have across the district, and if we don't maintain our chillers and our roofs, we go from the value of the property to zero really, really quickly. And that is a shame and a pure waste of taxpayer money. So we've done with our purchases that we've done through our capital expenditures, that's a big chunk, is $93 million increase from last year to this year, to make up for some of that shortfall for 8 years, because we had no other choice. There just wasn't money there. So with the increase of property values, I think it was prudently spent. I also think that, you know, some of the increase is done as far as the payment ladder, and to be able to employ our bus drivers and our teachers, so we have people in front of the classroom, in our classrooms, on our buses, the ability to have our buses deliver on time with not being broke down, the ability to have our teachers there deliver the proper presentation. You'll see a much more efficient operation that will in turn result in savings to the bottom line. It will also make a better deliverable product. So I'm proud to bring this budget forward and the tough decisions that were made, and I'll be supporting it, so thank you. I now call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0. At this point, we'll now move to superintendent and board attorney and board member comments. Ms. La Riviere, I'll start with you.
No comment.
Thank you. Ms. Morgan.
I have none.
Ms. Dozier.
I have none.
Ms. Fisher.
No comment.
I have none as well. Mr. Martin
None, thank you.
and Dr. Atkins.
I have none.
Thank you. At this point, I'd like to again thank Dr. Ismore and her team. Having no more business to come before this body, this meeting is adjourned.